Welcome to Investible Partnerships, where we talk to industry leaders about growing revenue-generating partnerships. I'm your host, Des Russell, and co-founder of Partner Elevate. And the daily battle for partner success is forcing channel leaders to rethink how to maximize their relevance and value so they can be a driver of partner impact. So let's jump in and find out how. Hey Chris, welcome to the Investible Partnerships podcast. It's fantastic to have you join myself in this conversation and join the Investible Partnerships podcast audience so we can learn how you are being a driver of partner impact at Rubrik in your position. But first thing I love to do is introduce yourself to our audience, let our audience know a little bit about yourself, how you got into partnerships. There's always a fantastic story because no one ever studies partnerships. We kind of land or get pushed there. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about you and how you got into your role right now at Rubrik, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Des. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast. So a little bit about myself. I live in Singapore. I've been here for the past 6 years with my wife and soon to be 2 kids and dog. We used to live in Sydney before that. But my current role is at Rubrik, and I look after the GSI Alliances. So that's Global System Integrators for APAC. I'm looking after markets India, ASEAN, and ANZ. And I've only been in the role for about 3 months. So I'm a newbie at Rubrik. But before that, I was at VMware for 14 years. So a very long time, seeing it across its multiple different stages of growth. I was in Ireland, I was in Sydney, and that's what brought me to Singapore. So, but before that, I was at Microsoft and Dell. So quite a few different organizations, but about 40 years old, 4 different organizations. That's about right.
Yeah. Kind of every couple of years. So what brought you into partnerships? I mean, how did you start in this today? What is partnerships and ecosystems?
Yeah, certainly. It's a good question. I still ask myself that many times. I remember when I actually announced to one of the sales leaders that I was joining partnerships at VMware, he said, "Oh, who did you piss off in Sydney to be demoted?" So, that was his original response. A classic Queenslander. But really, it was an intent. So I wanted to move from sales. So I've always been in the sales team until I joined kind of the partnership team at VMware. And I was like really enjoying selling to customers, but I'm speaking to the same infrastructure people. And I want to understand more about the supply chain and the partner ecosystem. What motivates them? How do they make money? And how does a vendor leverage this? And when do they leverage it to scale their own business? So it was a very intentful move to get into partnerships. I've learned a lot to doing that. So it was intentful.
Intentional with a little bit of a push, but you've stayed in there for quite some time. So what for you, when you look at this industry, what for you has been probably the most significant shifts that you've seen over your time in terms of how organizations are adopting and adapting to the role that partnerships play in their go-to-market?
Yeah, there definitely has been a shift in the past kind of 11 years or so. Before, it was just a channel. It was distribution to reseller, value-added reseller, and that's how it was viewed. Now we're seeing, and I think the hyperscalers have got to take a lot of credit here, is people are looking at the ecosystem from product integration all the way down to the services-driven businesses. I think hyperscalers really helped push that. Before, the platform was on hardware, essentially, right? And we leveraged people like Cisco, the Dells, the HPs of the world, and we put the applications on there. Now with the hyperscalers, I think it's really kind of forced people to think about these ecosystem players, because the customer is always buying from multiple different parties and being influenced by multiple different parties. I think tech vendors, we've got to remember the tech industry is still fairly young in terms of an industry compared to, say, the financial sector, etc.
Manufacturing and those sorts of things.
So we're still kind of catching up, I would say. And I think the people now in leadership roles in headquarters are realizing it's the power of the ecosystem. And it's kind of then they've got the challenge of how do they re-engineer their resources to leverage this ecosystem? Because they're so used to having a channel here, the product team doing product integrations, and then maybe a services arm where they maybe partner with services businesses separately. But how do they bring all that together to be more powerful within the ecosystem which surround their target audience?
I suppose when you think about these islands, there are these islands of engagement, or there's these islands of go-to-market that typically exist. Like we're getting product teams getting products to market. We're getting customer success teams working with customers that are in market, getting them to use and utilize the technology and the platforms. And then we've got this partner team that's sitting on also helping that entire organization go to market. So when you think about the changes that have happened, do you think that it's just from an ecosystem play, that it's just where ecosystems are? Or do you think that the hyperscalers have done something fundamentally different to kind of bring this all together?
I would say the hyperscalers have definitely fundamentally done something differently to bring all this together. The fact that you have to validate your products on their platform and put it in the marketplace. And the GSIs, for example, who I look after, that's where they go to work. They go to work on the hyperscalers on these platforms. So if you're an ISV, you have to be on them platforms. And then you have to figure out how do you leverage that to your best of ability. So one is the product integration. Do you just pick one hyperscaler? And then even within that hyperscaler, what are the other ISVs you plug into to make yourself much more sticky? So that's all the product integration. And that used to be done in silo, but because that's one of your strong go-to-markets is either, say, the marketplace, you need to be able to have the go-to-market teams aligned to what the product integration is going on to advocate that capability to them GSIs so they can actually build whatever services they want for whatever target industry they're building for.
Yeah.
And so you've got to bring that together in terms of working with GSI, understanding that, say, the business unit within the GSI you're looking after is the FSI, what's unique to them, then pulling down to, okay, what's in the marketplace that they're focusing on, what's the architectural changes needed, and then the product team's got to figure out, okay, who we're going to integrate with first to service the FSI market with the GSI.
So let's bring this back to your role, because I'd love to double click on this. You're in APAC and you're responsible for the GSI landing a strategy with GSIs, with Rubrik in this particular region. These GSIs operate across a whole bunch of other regions in the world. They also work with a whole bunch of other partners, hyperscalers and competitors, or people that surround the same technology problem that Rubrik's solving. So talk to me a little bit about, let's try and understand or unpack this. How do you, as a GSI Alliances Leader in APAC, decide out of the 17 partners that are there to work with, which ones to go to market with in different geographies? How do you do this without kind of working 80 hours a day or just absolutely killing yourself? And then how do you get the results? So let's kind of start up front. How do you look at your 17 GSIs to determine which ones are you going to focus on, which ones you aren't going to focus on right now?
There's a couple of frameworks I use because, like you say, it's a very big task. There is a lot of market coverage, and then these GSIs are huge as well. And within the GSIs, there's probably about 10 different business units that I should be targeting and working with. It's not feasible for one person. And then if you think about where I've come from, I've been in the business for 14 years at VMware. So then I've got probably a lot of biases and lots of things that have stuck with me that I need to shake off. So I always think about the first principles thinking. So what that means really for me is kind of questioning every assumption that I've got. So just because something works in Australia I need to drop that assumption, and does that work in Indonesia, for example, and vice versa, and then for India. So even though I've got maybe a thought of what could work, I've got to question every assumption, because what I do is I've got to be able to create a new solution, or we're doing business with these GSIs in them countries. So I've got to always bring it back to the first principles and what's the company's objectives. Then I've got to think about the kind of market in terms of which GSIs are going to service a market versus creating a market. We know some GSIs are a bit more innovative and more nimble than others. Now that's a broad statement. And then when you overlay it with in which country, they're going to be more innovative in a particular country versus another one. And you've got to be able to meet them people, understand them people, understand how they think. And you go, oh, actually, that person who looks after Australia is actually not as innovative as the person in, say, Indonesia. So I'm actually going to lean into the person in Indonesia, even though the Australian market's bigger. Because what you're looking for is somebody who's willing to move with you, especially when you're a challenger ISV like Rubrik, and then the willingness to be able to, the willingness to partner with us. So you put it these 17 in that kind of 2x2 matrix.
Yep.
So you can kind of map them out, and you can only really focus on 3 properly, and then you've probably got another 5 that you can do a lot of discovery work, keep warm. So that's how kind of I'm splitting my focus and time, is using them frameworks before I get to the next stage of partnering.
How did you learn those frameworks? Was that just your experience in the industry? Was this something that you learned from others in the industry? Because, these are the things that experienced operators have an advantage of when we kind of think about entering partnerships and ecosystems, which is, how can someone else learn this particular model?
It is experience, and it's hard to replicate experience. But one thing you can do to fast track it is read. A lot of things I get from books. Actually, I don't physically read the book. I listen to Audible. So a lot of business books are great. Then speaking to other people within the industry as well, just like we are right now. There's always little gems that I pick up from listening to your podcasts or many other podcasts as well. Then the other one is really just kind of understanding, it comes down to self-awareness. I think self-awareness of who you are, where the company is, and where the market is allows you to think a bit more clearly. And the more you have some self-awareness, the easier it is to execute.
And from a self-awareness, are you talking about understanding what you know and what you don't know, and then filling that particular gap, knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are? Well, what is self-awareness to you?
It's everything. So it touches on more of a personal topic as well. So I do think when I moved into a leadership role at VMware, one of the best leaders I've kind of witnessed were definitely people who are very self-aware. So I was like, okay, I'm going to invest in that. So I personally invested in a lot of different things to be more self-aware, to understand myself and how I respond in certain situations. So that's really important. And then I think the other aspect is, I think a lot of companies struggle with this, is to have some self-awareness of where they are as well. So if we have a look at it, Rubrik has an amazing business, and it's very focused on the enterprise, and they're doing huge deals in healthcare, FSI, in Europe, and health and government. In APJ, we're just starting, right? So if you think about the people who are leading the business or over in HQ, they've got to have the self-awareness that realizing that APAC's different, because it's actually it's almost like the final frontier. You know? And if they're creating a global program, they've got to be self-aware to realize, actually, we are going to change this rule because it makes sense in Americas and Europe. And that's maybe changing incentives, partner incentives, etc. And then they're going to leave APJ because they realize we're probably about 18 months behind. And I've actually seen them do that. So that's really good to see that at Rubrik. And that's it. Some of the vendors I've worked for didn't do that, and they just blanked it out.
Just
Incentive program,
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one good thing I see here in my short time at Rubrik is they actually are quite self-aware, and they're willing to admit a mistake and change the mistake quickly as well. And I've noticed that just in the short time I've been here. So it's a pretty impressive organizational self-awareness.
Yeah, I love that thinking, that self-awareness piece, because there is a mindset kind of part to that, which a lot of people talk about, but I like the framing of that from a self-awareness. Now let's look at self-awareness, like self-awareness, knowing what you're good at, knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, but also knowing where you're not so good. And I think in partnerships, I'd love to get your view here. We kind of enter partnerships, or you've got 17 GSIs. You've mentioned there's 3 GSIs you're probably going to work with right now. There's 5 or so GSIs that you're going to continue to build capability with or build a engagement with and lead them towards being execution focused. When you think about this from a self-awareness piece, how does it feel as a partnership professional when you are aligned on the self-awareness piece with a partner, where you know your strengths, they know their strengths, you know there's opportunities or areas that you're not going to operate in? So how does it feel when you're working with a partnership like that, to how does it feel when you're not working with a partnership like that? What are the things that you are tempted kind of always dealing with? Because that's what we go through all the time. So let's take how does it feel and what does a good partnership look like where there is the self-awareness? And then what does it look like, or what are the things you should be thinking about if there's not that alignment there?
Yeah, I think there's two different things around partner alignment with an ISV, and then the self-awareness thing. And the self-awareness is understanding, do we have the resources available to us to actually partner? So if we have a look at some of these GSIs, they're absolutely massive, and they're going, okay, you've got great technology, that's big tech, you've got something different, huge big tech, we can build services around it. Are you ready to partner with us? And that's where we've got to have the self-awareness, because you look at this large partner and you're going, you're like drooling at the mouth and you're going, hey, this is going to be absolutely amazing for us. Then you look around internally and you go, actually, we don't have the resources to partner with this GSI properly in region. And that's the self-awareness piece. And then that, obviously, if you have that, then you know which partner to align with. Yeah. So I do see them slightly different. And then that partner alignment, kind of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. I mean, the first one, especially when you're starting in a position like we are in Rubrik and we're still building the market, it's the willingness to partner. It is very important. So, okay, who's responding? Who takes kind of 2 months to respond, or who responds quickly? Who's got a goal that they need to achieve and they can leverage you to achieve that goal? There is certain GSIs that have made investments and have acquired regional SIs. Now, when that happens, that's a really good opportunity for an ISV, because you put some money down on the table, you've committed to X amount of growth. So if they've acquired a particular company, say in Australia or somewhere else in the region, okay, after the first part of the integration, that they want return of investment. Do you as an ISV align to their capabilities and what they're good at, the industries, etc., all the kind of standard stuff, and then you can lean into that because they're probably hungry for business. Now, with no GSIs, generally we pull them into deals, but when there's an external factor like that happening within your partner ecosystem, that's something an ISV can use to get more willingness to partner.
Yeah, I love that distinction. That's a really good distinction between the self-awareness and the alignment piece. What we do in partnerships is we're trying to bring the rest of the organization to see what we see. A lot of the time, there's always an element of data. There's always an element of the strategy that you're trying to connect with. So in the instances where you kind of have to be sort of truthful with yourself and go, well, actually, internally, when I look internally, we're just not ready to execute on this partnership. How do you reconcile that with, well, actually, we can't execute internally, but I've actually got a job to do. How do you reconcile this as a leader in your organization? Is there something you just push to the side, or do you have a way of helping others understand how they can actually go internally and help them understand what this opportunity is so we can build capacity or build the resourcing?
So yeah, you have to have the ears of the power internally, but you've also got to understand their requirements is to run a business as well, right? So we might be kind of going, hey, yeah, you got to invest in partnerships, but they've got other areas they need to invest in too. So it is something that you've really got to be very clear on what the market opportunity is, and you've got to be damn certain that you can execute on that, because there's a lot of times I've seen that people throw out these huge numbers. Yeah, if we work with this partner, they're doing X amount with our competitor, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars. So if we just hire these 5 people, we'll be able to capture that market share. And that's just really bad math because it doesn't always work, right?
It kind of feels like hope. Hope is not a strategy kind of thing.
But it can be dressed up and look like a great strategy because it's data driven. Data can be used, like numbers can be used to lie, right?
Yeah.
So I think about it as a bit of a triangle when I'm connecting with the GSI. I can't be reliant on one person or one business unit. It's a terrible strategy. And we know there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I know this person, they can do this for us. These organizations are huge. So I look at it from like a connection triangle. So I have alliances in one corner, and that alliances could be a number of different, say, champions as well. So they don't necessarily have to be in an alliance team at these GSIs, but just somebody who's going to really advocate for you. And then you've got to be across a certain practice leader, whether that's the Microsoft practice or the AWS practice, Google practice, or the database practice, or digital transformation practice, whatever it is, whatever you're doing as an ISV, you've got to be across them practice leaders, and they've got to also be bought in as well. And then the last bit, which is probably the most important piece, is their sales team. And the sales team sometimes is the client director, for example, or it's the person who actually gets paid on the technology. So sometimes the kind of GSI account manager is not necessarily the best person, but there's going to be a team around them who also get paid and they have a number on their head, whether it's consultants, whether it's managed services, etc. And I'd put them there. So you've got to have that mapped out. And then you might have had 1-2 wins, and then you can go back to the business and go, this is the market opportunity, and this is why I know I can execute. And these are the people I know. And even if that person leaves, I've still got a fallback. Yeah. So it's definitely an investable partnership. And that's just on the GSI piece. The next piece down is internally, and that mind share. And that starts from the ground up, and it starts with your sales team all the way up to the execs who have got the money to then invest in the partnership.
I love it. So we've got 2 key models here, which I'm sure our audience are going to absolutely hit you on, which is your segmentation model, your 2x2 model to determine which GSIs or how to prioritize your time, energy, and investment, and then this triangle model, which I absolutely love. I love models, so this is something that I definitely would love to probably unpack with you as well for the audience. So as a partnership professional, yes, you've got you with a lot of hard work and experience on your side. You are also a member of the partnership leaders community in the APAC region. So talk to me about why partnership leaders, why belonging to a community of professionals? What value do you get out of that? How does that actually help you in your role? And what are some of the things you've kind of received from that community that makes it worthwhile investment of your time? You actually lead the APAC, the Singapore as a chapter host. So you invest in time, energy. Tell me how you're using the community.
Yeah, certainly. So a bit like how I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like, where do you get all this information from? Partnership leaders is a huge component of that. And it's helping me connect to the wider partnership leaders within Singapore and the region, which is great. And that's where you kind of get the little tidbits of information on how they operate, which partners are doing what, no one's sharing any trade secrets, but just kind of, you get to realize, which partners are actually moving the market, Then the thing I love about hosting it is I just get to learn. Tomorrow I'm going to be hosting somebody from Accenture and somebody from Salesforce, and they're going to be talking about how they met and how they built their professional relationship and how they built the business together with Salesforce and Accenture. And it's an amazing story, and it's exactly what we're doing here right now, but I get to do that in front of an audience full of people from Singapore. There's people who are part of the partnership leaders community who are actually in town from India, and they're going, I'd love to join that meetup as well. So you really kind of expand your network, and somebody in partnerships, networking is very important. One, just to know who's who and where they all are, and really get a sense of what's going on, because you can't know everything.
No,
it's impossible. It's impossible. And this is such a dynamic market as well. It changes all the time. I mean, when I first jumped into partnerships, AWS was tiny. I remember when I was in Ireland and I was being headhunted by AWS in the UK, and that was years ago. And I was like, who are them? I'm not joining them. Probably the biggest financial mistake I've made in my life. But it's so dynamic. And kind of the more you can branch out your network and be connected, the more you've got a finger on the pulse on the industry and where it's going.
It's kind of like the role of partnerships, right? Is that like nothing's ever the same. Like you're working with different partnerships. Yes, you might be executing a particular go-to-market, which is the same, customer segment and product. But the reality is you're working with different types of partners, which require a different type of strategy, which also require a different type of relationship, which also require a different type of other partners that you surround that particular relationship as well. And that absolutely the Singapore chapter, and I know we've got Anuj in India growing that chapter as well for partnership leaders. But I think it's a fantastic and important part of the ecosystem, particularly here in APAC or APJ or ASEAN, because as you mentioned earlier, it's like the last conquered territory for any of the ISVs or hyperscalers or anyone who's looking for market share and revenue growth. It is the last kind of space, and you need this kind of help, and you need this type of community to help you go a little bit faster and also contribute a little bit more, which is great. What's a community of contribution, not competition? I think I didn't coin that phrase, but I absolutely love that as well. So, Chris, we like to have a bit of fun on our podcast as well. So there's this thing called Partnerships Fast 5. Everyone passes it and everyone wins it. But it's a way for us to just get what's on top of your mind. So I'll throw you a couple of statements, and I just want the first word, just finish off my sentence with whatever comes to mind as well. First, partnerships thrive on
people.
Partnerships embody
trust.
Through partnerships, you can
age rapidly. Execute.
Execute. Okay, cool. Partnerships spark
ideas.
And last one, partnerships succeed through
commitment.
Love it. Well, there, Partnerships Fast 5 done. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. And I think there's always something that our audience can learn from operators in partnerships. But I think in particular, you've got a great story, right? Global ISV, now a public company, a lot of pressure in a new region, creating a market. So I'm sure our audience would love to understand how they connect with you, learn a little bit more about your segmentation model or your triangle model. So how best can our audience connect with you and understand a little bit more about what we've discussed today?
Well, the best networking tool is LinkedIn, so they can reach out there. And if they're part of the Partnership Leaders community, they can reach out to me on Slack.
Excellent. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you join me in this conversation today and share your story of how you've been a driver of partner impact.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you for listening to Investible Partnerships. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit investablepartnerships.com for the transcripts of today's show.